Mount Everest, the towering crown of the Himalayas, looms like a siren of the skies, beckoning adventurers to test their limits against its unforgiving heights. For generations, climbers have been drawn to its summit, their ambitions fueled by a desire to conquer the world's highest peak. Yet, this pursuit carries an ominous weight, a grim reminder that Everest's beauty is matched only by its peril. Since the early 1920s, more than 300 climbers have perished on its slopes, and 2/3 of their bodies remain there, frozen where they fell, unable to be recovered. These lifeless figures, preserved in the ice, are grim landmarks for those who follow in their footsteps. For those who climb, the unspoken truth is this: the mountain often keeps what it takes. The high-altitude environment and extreme conditions on Everest pose significant obstacles to recovery operations. Logistical complexities are the main culprit. It is highly inefficient, impractical, and dangerous to move frozen bodies, which can weigh over 300 pounds or 136 kilograms. The bodies frozen on Everest tell a story both haunting and inspiring. They are a sobering reminder of the mountain's power and a testament to the unyielding human spirit. In this video, I'll uncover the gripping stories of 7 climbers whose bodies are now part of Everest's haunting legacy. Viewers' discretion is advised. For nearly 20 years, climbers on Everest's unforgiving north face encountered a haunting and unforgettable sight: a frozen body nicknamed Green Boots. The name Green Boots refers to the green Koflak mountaineering boots on his feet. This frozen body, lying in a limestone alcove just 350 meters or 1,150 feet below the summit, became a chilling waypoint, a stark reminder of Everest's deadly risks. Green Boots, widely recognized as one of the most famous bodies on the mountain, is believed to be Sewang Paljor, a member of the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. Paljor, a head constable, was part of a 3-man Indo-Tibetan Border Police climbing party that perished in the infamous blizzard of May 1996, which also took the lives of 5 other mountaineers. On May 10th, Paljor and his team summited in worsening weather, but the descent turned deadly. They were caught in a murderous storm. Separated from his group in fierce winds and driving snow, he sought refuge from the snowstorm and crawled toward a small cave at around 8,500 meters or 27,900 feet. Exhausted, low on oxygen, and exposed to plummeting temperatures, he sat there, shivering in the storm until he froze to death. For years, Green Boots' resting place became a landmark for climbers ascending the northeast ridge. It was not only a grim reminder of the mountain's dangers, but also a waypoint used by mountaineers to gauge their proximity to the summit. In 2014, the Chinese government, at the request of Paljor's family, moved the body to a more discreet location. Nobody saw Green Boots between 2014 and 2017 while climbing from the north side. But in 2017, reports emerged that the body was once again visible, now partially obscured by rocks. In June 1924, 2 climbers, George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, set out on an expedition that would etch their names into the annals of mountaineering history. Their goal? To become the first humans to conquer the summit of Mount Everest. George Mallory, a seasoned British climber, had already attempted Everest twice before. When asked why he wanted to climb the mountain, his famous response, "Because it's there," captured the imagination of the world. With him was Sandy Irvine, a 22-year-old engineer chosen for his technical expertise with oxygen systems. On June 8th, Mallory and Irvine were last seen alive by their teammate, Noel Odell, from a lower vantage point. Odell described spotting 2 figures scaling the second step, only a few hundred meters below the summit. Then, clouds rolled in, obscuring them from view. They were never seen alive again. For 75 years, Mallory and Irvine's fate remained one of the greatest mysteries of mountaineering. Did they reach the summit before succumbing to the unforgiving mountain? In 1999, Mallory and Irvine research expedition set out to uncover the truth. On May 1st, 1999, climber Conrad Anker, a member of the expedition, made a chilling discovery on the northern face of Everest. He found the frozen remains of George Mallory. His body lay at 26,760 feet, or 8,150 meters, just 2,000 feet below the summit. Amazingly well preserved by the icy conditions, Mallory's clothing and equipment offered tantalizing clues about his final moments. Mallory's body showed deep rope marks around his waist, suggesting he had fallen while tied to Irvine. Anker noted that Mallory's right leg was severely broken, but his uninjured left leg was carefully positioned over it, indicating he likely survived the fall for some time before succumbing to his injuries. A pair of dark snow goggles found in Mallory's pocket hinted that the accident might have occurred at dusk as the pair descended the mountain. However, one crucial item was missing: the photograph of his wife that Mallory had promised to leave at the summit. This absence raised questions. Had he and Irvine made it to the top before tragedy struck? The mystery deepened because Irvine carried a Kodak vest pocket camera lent by a teammate, Howard Somerville. If found, the undeveloped film in the camera could hold the answer to one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. Did Mallory and Irvine conquer Everest in 1924, nearly 3 decades before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay's confirmed ascent? Though Mallory and Irvine's ultimate fate remains shrouded in mystery, their daring spirit continues to inspire climbers and adventurers around the world. Whether or not they conquered Everest, they achieved immortality in the hearts of all who dare to dream of the impossible. In May 1998, a couple from the US, Frances Arsentive and her husband Sergei, set out to fulfill a daring dream: summiting Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. It was an ambitious feat fraught with peril, but for the couple, it symbolized both love and adventure. Tragically, their story would end in heartbreak, forever marking Frances as Sleeping Beauty on Everest. On May 22nd, after 2 aborted attempts and exhausting conditions, the couple made their final summit push. Moving slowly and fatigued by the lack of oxygen, they reached the summit dangerously late in the day. Frances achieved her dream, becoming the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. However, the descent turned catastrophic. As they descended, the couple became separated. Sergei reached the base camp the next morning, only to realize Frances had not arrived. Fearing for her safety, he immediately set off to find her, carrying oxygen and medical supplies. That decision would cost him his life. On the morning of May 23rd, climbers from an Uzbek team found Frances just below the summit. She was alive but barely conscious, suffering from frostbite and severe oxygen deprivation. Unable to move on her own, she pleaded for help. The Uzbek team gave up on their own summit push and helped her with oxygen and carried her down as far as they could, until, depleted of their own oxygen, they became too fatigued to continue the effort. Frances Arsentive was still alive. Unable to continue carrying her down more, and their own lives also at stake, the Uzbek climbers made their way down to camp that evening. They met Sergei on his way back up to her. This was the last time he was seen alive. The next morning, May 24th, British climber Ian Woodall and South African Cathy O'Dowd stumbled upon Frances. They initially mistook her for a lifeless body, but to their shock, she was still alive, muttering weakly. Recognizing her from earlier encounters at base camp, they tried for over an hour to help her. Frances, barely clinging to life, begged them not to leave her. But given her critical condition, the treacherous location, and the bitter cold, they had no choice but to abandon her and descend to safety. Frances was left lying in the snow, still clipped to the guide rope, her lifeless body resembling a wax figure frozen in time. Her peaceful appearance led climbers to nickname her Sleeping Beauty. Everest's Sleeping Beauty died on the same location, aged 40. Sergei's fate remained a mystery until the following year, when his body was discovered by Jake Norton of the 1999 Mallory and Irvine expedition. It appeared Sergei had fallen to his death while trying to save Frances. For nearly a decade, Frances' body remained visible along the climbing route, a haunting reminder of Everest's harsh realities. Ian Woodall, tormented by the memory of leaving her behind, returned to the mountain in 2007 on a mission to bury her. On May 23, 2007, he located her body, performed a brief ritual, and moved her to a lower location on the mountain face, ensuring she would no longer be visible to passing climbers. In October 1979, Gerhard Schmatz and Hannelore Schmatz from West Germany recorded their names in mountaineering history as the first married couple to summit Mount Everest. However, their triumphant ascent ended in heartbreak as tragedy struck during the descent. Hannelore Schmatz became the first woman and the first German to die high on Everest. The expedition, comprising 8 climbers and 5 Sherpas, began their final push from the South Col on September 28th. Gerhard Schmatz's group reached the summit on October 1st, braving difficult ice conditions and steep ridges. Jubilant yet drained, they returned to camp as night fell. The second summit team, which included Hannelore, guide Ray Jennett, and several Sherpas, reached the summit on October 2nd in worsening weather conditions. With oxygen supplies running low, they began a harrowing descent in heavy snow and poor visibility. Ray Jennett, exhausted and out of oxygen, refused to continue descending and decided to bivouac at 8,500 meters, with Hannelore and Sherpa Sundar staying to support him. Sherpa Ong Jongbu descended alone to seek help, but night had fallen and a furious storm enveloped the mountain. A brutal storm raged through the night, and temperatures plummeted. Jennett succumbed to hypothermia, and his body was buried in the snow. Hannelore and Sundar, though alive, were severely weakened. During the descent the next day, Hannelore collapsed from exhaustion at approximately 27,230 feet, or 8,300 meters. She sat against her backpack, reportedly asking for water, before succumbing to the mountain's harsh conditions. Sundar, frostbitten and on the brink of death himself, was rescued by Sherpas climbing up from lower camps. Hannelore's frozen body remained on the mountain, sitting upright against her pack with her hair blowing in the wind, her eyes open in an expression of eternal exhaustion. Her haunting figure became a grim landmark for climbers on the southern route. In 1984, a rescue team attempting to recover her body met with further tragedy when 2 members fell to their deaths. Over time, high winds swept her remains down the Kangshung face, erasing one of Everest's most haunting reminders of its unforgiving nature. Rob Hall was a highly experienced guide from Christchurch, New Zealand. He was the owner of Adventure Consultants. Hall reached the summit of Everest at around 2:10 p.m. on May 10, 1996. As the skies began to darken and the wind picked up, Hall waited patiently for his client, Doug Hansen, who was still climbing painfully slowly toward the top. Hall's Sherpa team, recognizing the weather's rapid decline, began their descent at 3 p.m., urging Hansen and Hall to follow. Finally, at 4 p.m., Hansen summited. But it was too late, far beyond the safe turnaround time. Hall and Hansen lingered only briefly before beginning their descent. Just 100 meters below the summit, Hansen collapsed. He was exhausted and out of supplemental oxygen. Despite his own worsening condition, Hall stayed by his client's side, trying desperately to help him down the treacherous ridge. At 4:30 p.m., Hall radioed for assistance, reporting their dire situation. But confusion compounded their plight. Andy Harris, another guide from Hall's team, was at the South Summit cache with access to oxygen canisters. Suffering from hypoxia-induced delirium, Harris mistakenly believed the canisters were empty and relayed this misinformation over the radio. By the time Hall received clarification about the oxygen supply at 5 p.m., a vicious storm enveloped the mountain. Winds howled, visibility plummeted, and the route back to Camp 4 disappeared. Stranded at 28,700 feet, or 8,747 meters in hurricane-force winds, their situation turned increasingly grim. Lopsong Sherpa, descending from the South Summit, spotted Harris trudging upward with oxygen and water for Hall and Hansen. Realizing the canisters were full, Harris performed an extraordinary act of bravery. He continued toward the summit ridge to help the struggling climbers, knowing the risks. Harris was last seen near the South Summit before disappearing into the storm later that night. Hall, meanwhile, refused to abandon Hansen, even as conditions worsened. The two tried to descend the Hillary Step, but Hansen lacked the strength to climb down. Hall's final radio calls indicated that Hansen had fallen unconscious. The final moments of Hansen's life remain an enigma, shrouded by the chaos of Everest's death zone. It's believed that Hall and Harris managed to help Hansen descend to within 50 vertical feet of the South Summit. But then, tragedy struck. Hansen likely lost his footing and plunged down the sheer southwest face, disappearing into Everest's unforgiving expanse. Exposed to Everest's fury, Hall and Harris descended to a small saddle below the South Summit, a decision likely aimed at finding shelter. They huddled together to wait out the storm. While Rob was asleep, Harris started hallucinating. He was feeling the effects of hypoxia. Having been stuck on the mountain for too long, without supplemental oxygen caused Harris to hallucinate and take off his outer layers even though he was probably frostbitten. This led to disorientation and dementia. Nothing is known about how the young guide met his end, but it's been speculated that he might have lost his balance and broke through a cornice and plunged down the steep Kangshung face. His ice axe and jacket were found near Hall's body several days later. Over the course of the night, Hall endured temperatures far below freezing, sub-zero winds, and a lack of oxygen. Against all odds, he survived the storm's peak, still alive when dawn broke on May 11th. Despite frostbitten hands and feet, Hall remained coherent during early radio communications that morning. He confirmed Hansen's death and Harris' disappearance, but was too weak to attempt further descent. His oxygen regulator had frozen, leaving him without a functioning supply. Back at Camp 4, Hall's Sherpas mounted a heroic rescue attempt. Battling 40-knot winds and brutal cold, they climbed toward Hall, carrying oxygen and hot tea. But, by 3 p.m., they were forced to turn back, still 700 feet below the south summit. The storm was unrelenting, and their strength was spent. Later in the afternoon, Hall made a heartbreaking call to base camp, asking them to call his wife, Jane Arnold, on the satellite phone. It was the last communication from Rob Hall. He died shortly after, succumbing to hypoxia and the relentless cold. 12 days later, climbers David Britsiers and Ed Visters discovered Hall's body near the south summit. He had arranged his oxygen bottles around him in an attempt to shelter from the wind. His ice axe stood upright in the snow, a testament to his determination to survive. Rob Hall's body has become part of Everest's lingering mysteries. There are 3 theories about where it might rest today. The first suggests his body remains frozen and buried under layers of snow and ice near the south summit where he died. The second possibility is that his body was moved off the main climbing route, perhaps to shield it from the view of future mountaineers passing by on their way to the summit. The third and most dramatic theory is that Hall's body may have been swept off the ridge by ferocious winds or deliberately pushed over the edge to the steep Kangshung face. If this is true, his remains could now lie beneath tons of ice on the remote Kangshung Glacier in Tibet, far from the route most climbers tread. Each scenario reflects the raw, unrelenting nature of Everest, where even the strongest and most skilled climbers are at the mercy of the elements. Scott Fisher was a renowned mountain guide from Seattle. He was the owner of Mountain Madness. Fisher reached the summit of Everest at 3:40 p.m. on May 10, 1996. Lobsang, his loyal teammate, was waiting for him at the top. But something wasn't right. Fisher was clearly exhausted and unwell. Experts believe he was already showing signs of high-altitude pulmonary edema or cerebral edema, potentially both. By 3:55 p.m., Fisher began his descent with his Sherpa, voluntarily staying at the back of his group to ensure everyone's safety. But the descent was anything but smooth. As a violent storm engulfed the upper slopes, Fisher's condition worsened. Around 6 p.m., Lobsang found him struggling near the balcony, his oxygen mask off. Fisher's confusion and despair were mounting. He even talked about wanting to jump off the ridge. Lobsang, determined to save his leader, tied Fisher to a rope and guided him downward through the storm. Short-roped by Lobsang, Fisher managed to descend another 300 feet, but his strength was fading fast, and he collapsed in the snow, unable to go on. At around 8 p.m., the pair encountered climber Gao, who had also been abandoned by his Sherpas and was too weak to move. Fisher urged Lobsang to head down and bring back help. Reluctantly, Lobsang left Fisher and Gao on a ledge, 1,200 feet above the South Col, and fought his way down through the storm. The next day, May 11th, a team of Sherpas climbed up from Camp 4 to rescue Fisher and Gao. They reached the ledge and found the immobilized climbers where Lobsang had left them. Scott was barely breathing. They tried to administer oxygen, but he was unresponsive. Scott was in deep coma. His eyes were fixed in their sockets, and his teeth were tightly clenched. His chances of survival were slim. The Sherpas concluded that he was beyond hope. At 1 p.m., they put an oxygen mask on him, opened the valve, and left him a full cylinder. The Sherpas focused on rescuing Gao, who was barely clinging to life. In a heroic effort, they short-roped Gao down to safety at the South Col. Having failed to rouse Scott and get him moving downward, the Sherpas had, in effect, given him up for dead. But Anatoly Bukriv couldn't believe it, and although near exhaustion himself, he set out at 5 p.m. as the storm intensified, only a little more than an hour before dark to make one last effort to save Fisher. By 8 p.m., Anatoly reached the ledge and found Fisher, but it was too late. He had already frozen to death in the storm. Scott Fisher's final moments were hauntingly lonely. He died in isolation, his strength and will to live slipping away. Disoriented by cerebral edema and hypothermia, he exhibited paradoxical undressing, stripping off his gloves and jacket as his body shut down. In his final act of respect, Anatoly shrouded Fisher's upper body and moved him off the main climbing route. He collected Fisher's ice axe, camera, and a cherished pocket knife, which would later be given to Fisher's 9-year-old son in Seattle. Scott Fisher's body remains below the balcony on Everest's triangular face, at an altitude of 8,400 meters. Fisher's decision to stay with his team to the end, despite his own failing health, is a testament to his character as a leader. He died as he lived, fighting to protect others and driven by a love of the mountains that few could understand. David Sharp was a 34-year-old British climber. In May 2006, he set out to summit Everest on his own terms. He was on a budget expedition with minimal oxygen and no team to support him. an approach that left him dangerously vulnerable. On May 15th, he reached the summit, but the descent proved fatal. Exhausted, low on oxygen, and freezing, Sharp sought refuge in the very cave where Green Boots, another fallen climber, lay frozen. For hours, David Sharp sat in the alcove, struggling to survive. Over 40 climbers passed him that day, many mistaking him for another body on Everest. While some noticed he was still alive, most pressed on, driven by their own summit ambitions. Everest's brutal conditions, extreme cold, low oxygen, and the mental toll of altitude made rescuing Sharp nearly impossible. Sharp succumbed to what is believed to be a combination of hypothermia, altitude sickness, and possibly oxygen deprivation. It was his third attempt to climb Everest from the north side. In previous attempts, he lost toes to frostbite. Sharp's tragic death in 2006 highlighted the ethical dilemmas faced by climbers on Everest. Despite multiple climbers passing his suffering body, few offered significant assistance, sparking a widespread debate about the nature of human compassion in extreme conditions. Certainly, Sharp himself should be held accountable for his death. There are obvious inherent risks of climbing Everest, especially without the support of a full expedition team and with minimal oxygen. These were critical factors in the tragedy. After his death, his body remained high on the northeast ridge for about a year. Sherpas took Sharp's body to a nearby cliff edge and respectfully pushed it over the side of the north face. He joined the 200-plus frozen bodies on Everest. David Sharp, Scott Fisher, Rob Hall, Hannelore Schmatz, Francis Arsentive, George Mallory, Green Boots, and countless others dared to conquer the world's highest peak, but paid the ultimate price. Their bodies symbolize a sobering truth. Behind every frozen figure on Everest was once a brave, determined individual chasing an extraordinary dream. Their frozen bodies are both a warning and a tribute to human ambition and resilience.